he tries to convince himself that he had accomplished a lot, but in the background, Putin is orating on television.
Now, first of all, can you just give me your, as it were, summary at the outset of what you believe the verdicts of history on Mikhail Gorbachev is going to be?
Well, that depends on how history turns out itself. If Russia finds its way, finally, maybe in decades, to a democracy, to becoming a democracy, then I think people will look back at Gorbachev as having been the founder and having been present at the creation, even though that creation was followed by very difficult authoritarian years. On the other hand, if Russia remains the authoritarian, even totalitarian place it has become under Vladimir Putin, then Gorbachev may be blamed for helping to bring on that terrible outcome.
Well, it's often said, isn't it, that history depends on who's doing the writing. Now, you've had a very close personal look at this man, this leader, and you've written that Gorbachev was hard to understand. Just can you tell us, what did you mean by that?
Actually, it was he who said that to me. It was a rather funny moment because this was about a year after I had begun work on his biography. And he said with great expectation, "How's it going? How's it going?" And I said apologetically, "Slowly, I'm afraid." And he said, "Don't worry, Gorbachev is hard to understand."
Hmm.
Now, I think that is true. I mean, look at his reputation. In Russia, he is widely despised. In the West, he's viewed as as a kind of hero who pointed the way to a better world.
Mm.
So there's division as to how he should be understood.
And what then would you pick if you were asked for your own judgment on that question?
My own judgment is that he was both a hero and a failure. And that is what he set out to try to do, to democratize Russia, to end the Cold War, to abolish nuclear weapons. These were magnificent, noble aims,
Yes.
but he didn't get there. He was partially successful for a portion of time, and then it all collapsed, and the Soviet Union went with it. And eventually, we have Vladimir Putin, the war in Ukraine, not only a new Cold War after Gorbachev ended the old one, but a hot war in Ukraine.
Yeah. I mean, the changes that Gorbachev achieved in Russia were, of course, momentous. I mean, perestroika and glasnost, openness and reform, they changed the whole nature of that country, the whole nature of the Soviet Empire, the climate around the world. Would it have happened? Do you think, William? Would it have happened without Gorbachev? Was he a man who changed the times, or was he the right man at the right time?
No, I think he was unique. There was nobody else, or almost nobody else, in his Kremlin circle who wanted to do what he tried to do. There were two or three people like Alexander Yakovlev and Eduard Shevardnadze, his colleagues, but the only reason they were in a position to support him was that he had either appointed them or kept them on.
Yeah.
So he was the only one. The others wanted at most minimal changes in what in the old system, which was old and creaky, and but probably could have limped on for another 20 years.
Yes. So, in a sense, Gorbachev, you're saying, was a man well ahead of his time, certainly in terms of his country. Then, what do you think gave him? What made that a part of his character? Where did he gain that insight? Because many of those around him, they saw the world through a more familiar prism, didn't they? Which was not the same as Gorbachev's.
That's a great question because that's what I tried to explain by writing his biography. And I think the answer goes back to his childhood. He grew up in terrible times. He grew up in the 1930s and 1940s, but he had a wonderful family, or at least particularly his father, and he was a optimistic, confident man. Gorbachev was. He grew up feeling optimistic and confident and trusting people, which was a miracle in a time when so many people denounced each other.
Mm,
And these qualities, I think, sustained him, and they helped to explain his ability to at least try to transform his country and the world.
mm.
It required that kind of optimism and confidence that he derived as a child, and then was buttressed during his years at Moscow University when he associated with some of the best and brightest of his generation. People turned out to be his supporters when he began his reforms.
Yeah, no, this is a question, William, a last question, I think, to which there is no answer. So forgive me for asking it, but I can't help wondering, and I'm particularly keen to hear your thoughts on the answer to this. Would Mikhail Gorbachev now consider himself a failure, looking at the state of the world now, looking to where Russia has been taken under Vladimir Putin? Gorbachev took Russia away from its Soviet bloc Iron Curtain mindset into something much more open. He pulled the world back from the brink of Cold War turning into hot war. It was a moment of enormous openness. When the Berlin Wall came down, a famous historian called it the end of history. Well, now when we look at where we are now, the world in turmoil, economically and strategically, we are on the brink again. Do you think Gorbachev would consider himself a failure?
You know, it's very difficult to consider yourself a failure for anybody. Uh, in his very last years, two Russians made an excellent documentary film about him, which they called Gorbachev.Heaven. And in this film, they interviewed him at great length, and you could hear him agonizing about what his record consists of and what it amounts to in the end. And in that film, he takes credit for many of the things that we give him credit for doing, but there's also a kind of sad overtone of regret about how it turned out. And in this film, this old man who is already old and frail, as he agonizes and self-scrutinizes, the filmmakers show in the background a television which is broadcasting a Putin speech. And that sort of sums up the situation.
Yes.
He no longer believes that he has been a great success. He tries to convince himself that he had accomplished a lot, but in the background, Putin is orating on television.